So I'll call on Mathias, Colomb, Cree Nation Chief Arlen Dumas.
Igose, tanse, nas komuno te pi pigisko yana notes. Arlen Dumas te sediga sun pagitaga niga utsi. I'm the chief of the Mathias Colomb Cree Nation from Pucketawagan, Manitoba. I'd like to acknowledge Grand Chief Nipanak, Grand Chief Harper, and Grand Chief Clear Sky for coming and standing in solidarity with my community today. I also would like to acknowledge the Idle No More organizers and the Idle No More community for being here and standing in solidarity with my community as well. The Missinippi Niidoak of the Mathias Colomb Cree Nation are sovereign people. We have extensive traditional and treaty territories upon which our families, communities, and nations have lived on since time immemorial. These lands form an integral part of our Missinippi Niidoak identity, culture, language, ceremonies, and way of life. Our traditional and treaty lands are central to our entire governance system, laws, trade networks, and economies. We are inseparable from our lands. Our relationship to the land is referred to as wagutuin. We are all connected. We are all related. We know that the health and well-being of our children and grandchildren, 7 generations into the future, depends on our ability to both benefit from and protect our traditional treaty lands. In fact, the health and well-being of all Manitobans depends on our collective efforts to protect lands, waters, plants, and animals within our territories. Our community of Mathias Colomb Cree Nation has always lived and worked alongside our treaty partners in the spirit and of peace and friendship. We help the newcomers get established and learn how to survive in our territories. We also signed treaties which promised that we would all share in the wealth of these lands. However, MCCN has not benefited from the treaties as originally envisioned by our ancestors. The province of Manitoba has created a system of laws, policies, licenses, permits that have effectively acted like a blockade against our rights to enjoy the benefits of our land. Instead of acting in the best interests of MCCN and all Manitobans, the province of Manitoba has created a legal and political landscape which favors the executives of large corporations like Hudbay Mining and Smelting. Hudbay is seeking approvals from Manitoba to develop the Lalore Lake Mine project, which is on unceded Missinippi Niidoak territory. The province of Manitoba has failed to consult with MCCN or obtain our consent to allow Hudbay to operate on MCCN territory and extract MCCN resources. Therefore, on January 28th, I, together with my community members, Idle No More activist Pamela Palmer, and other supporters, attended the Lalore Lake site to serve a stop work order on Hudson Bay and the province of Manitoba. We monitored the situation and noted that neither party complied with our order, which was based on our traditional Cree laws. We therefore attended at the site a second time on March 5th to serve a second stop work order. Both site visits were peaceful gatherings where community members engaged in drumming, singing, and cooking traditional foods. We made sure we spoke with Hudbay representatives, worked out safety protocols for all involved, and invited them to join our cultural activities. The RCMP attended at MCCN's request to help enforce Cree law and keep the peace. Upon arrival, Hudbay closed their gates to prevent traffic from coming and going, and we used our vehicles to help reinforce their safety measures and keep our members safe from traffic. Hudbay never contacted me to address my concerns, nor did the province of Manitoba fulfill its constitutional legal obligations to enforce the stop work order. Instead, both Hudbay and the province of Manitoba issued very similar letters to me explaining that Manitoba fully supports Hudbay's activities in MCCN territory. Hudbay then served me with a notice of a motion to evict me and my community members from using our traditional and treaty territories. Hudbay is seeking to have me, my community members, and Idle No More activist Pamela Palmater jailed if we attend at any of their sites in Manitoba, one of which is a public provincial park. Despite the outstanding Aboriginal, inherent, and treaty rights at issue, Hudbay is also suing MCCN for millions of dollars in general, special, and punitive damages. For a company that is supposed to be focused on corporate social responsibility, Hudbay's actions will socially devastate our community. MCCN gets less than $17 million a year in federal funding to manage our extreme poverty on reserve. Some of our families live 25 people to a home, yet we live on some of the richest territories in Manitoba. Instead of the province and the Hudbay engaging MCCN in a meaningful process, they have partnered to blockade MCCN from accessing our own lands. Hudbay is also suing our community for millions of dollars, which would threaten the health and safety of our community members. On top of all this, MCCN will be left with the irrevocable environmental damage to our lands and waters by Hudbay's destructive activities. This will impact the health and safety of all Manitobans. I sincerely hope that Manitobans will stand beside my community as we defend our treaty and public parklands for all our future generations. I am here today to give notice that MCCN will continue to use and occupy our traditional and treaty lands as we have done since time immemorial. We will continue to protect our lands and waters. We will continue to hunt, fish, and trap. We will continue to use our lands to sustain our families and communities and our nation. No court injunction will stop me or my community members from exercising our constitutionally protected rights. It is my hope that the province of Manitoba and Hudbay will rethink their position and come to the table in good faith to resolve this in the best interests of all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Dumas. Just for your information, the press release is available at the back there somewhere for the press. And also now we have Grand Chief Harper to make his press statement. Grand Chief Harper.
First of all, I want to thank the Treaty 1 Territory for allowing us to dwell in their nations here today. And again, with our support with Chief Dumas. First of all, I want to say that I fully support, along with the Northern First Nations of Manitoba, we support and recognize the Mathias Colomb Cree Nation sovereignty, their ownership of their traditional lands, their lakes, their rivers, and other natural resources. Mathias Colomb Cree Nation is one of the largest communities in our MKO region, and I stand in solidarity with Chief Arlen Dumas. We would be rich nations if we had access to our own natural resources, as intended by the sacred treaties. There's an economic oppression by government through their laws, regulations, and policies. And we remain the poorest of the poor in this wealthy country. The government of Manitoba is also to blame. They continue to cater to big companies by handing out licenses and permits without consultation or consent by First Nations. I'm appalled with the recent events and actions of Hudbay Minerals to threaten one of our communities into further poverty by filing a court injunction. These heavy-handed actions by Hudbay, supported by Manitoba government, demonstrates the lack of good faith on their part, which will maintain First Nations in perpetual poverty. I think Hudbay and Manitoba have an opportunity to rise in the occasion of changing the status quo, which is now dismal. Such legal actions are proceeding. We hope that the province of Manitoba will reassess their position and do the right thing. We as First Nations must be permitted to enjoy the economic prosperity enjoyed by Manitobans and Canadians. With that, I just want to say thank you, and we continue our support with Chief Dumas. Miigwech.
Now we have the Grand Chief, Derek Nipanek.
Miigwech. Bonjour, Anishinaabe. Nuichi Ogi Makanak. Shigo Nadenewe Maganato. Nibin Makwan Dishnakas Makwan Totem. First of all, I just want to thank those of you who have come in today from the cold. I want to recognize members of the American Indian movement who are here, as well as Jerry Daniels, and the I Don't Know More group, Pam Palmater, who's traveled in from the east, as well as all those who have made your way downtown, taken the buses, gotten here in whatever way you could to be part of this very important information session and press conference that we're having here today. Of course, I want to thank the media for making your way out. I know it's cold and windy out there today, but this is a very important topic that we need to put to the forefront of our minds as First Nations people, but also as Manitobans and Canadians. The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, of course, is going to stand in solidarity with Chief Dumas, the people of the Mathias Colomb Cree Nation, and all Indigenous people who are concerned with the heavy-handed approach exemplified by Hudbay's application to bar people from their traditional Indigenous territories. We have been witnessing this for far too long, whether it be in mining, whether it be in lumber, whether it be in fishing. Indigenous people in Manitoba have been barred from economic participation for generations now. Economic blockades, economic apartheid has been strategically set up through the creation and implementation of policy and law that has prevented us from enjoying the prosperity that other Canadians have grown to take for granted. That's not the arrangements we made at treaty time. At treaty time, we made mutual obligations. We lifted the pipes. We solemnized the process in a sacred way to ensure that prosperity would be there for everybody into the future. My generations, as well as all of your generations, into perpetuity. As long as the grass grows, the sun shines, and the river flows. And that's why I continue to wear the treaty rings, Treaty 1 to 11, and Treaty 4, representing my home territory, because that's where I come from, that's what I believe in. That's the source of my identity, and that's where my laws come from. I have a lot of trouble recognizing Canadian laws that are developed in Canadian courts, provincial laws and regulations that are developed down the street by people who won't even follow their own laws. Consultation standards are not being met. Consent of the people is not being sought. So whose laws are we to fall back on? Whose laws are re-emerging now? It's our laws, and we're going to stand strong. We have a duty to stand against unjust practices and unjust laws that are being implemented and practiced by governments, whether it be the provincial government and its failure to follow due diligence in its own processes and environmental standards and conservation, or the federal government as it passes new legislation that will allow for the poisoning of valuable sources of water that we continue to need to live on. If the people of Mathias Colomb Cree Nation, and if the chief of Mathias Colomb Cree Nation is going to be criminalized and arrested, put in jail, whatever the consequences may be, then they might as well do it to all of us, because we stand here in solidarity. We stand here together. We're standing at a very historical time. We're standing in the early days of treaty implementation. Treaty implementation is not going to start at high-level tables behind locked doors between the popular actors of the day, being the Prime Minister, nor anybody's national chief. Treaty implementation is going to happen on the ground in the ancestral lands of our people by the will and the desire of our grassroots people to promote and create and protect the future for generations to come. That's where treaty implementation starts, and that's where it's going to continue. As I said, it's not these high-level tables or bureaucratic processes that are going to parachute in from 35,000 feet. That's not how it's going to happen. It's got to happen on the ground, and it's got to happen by all of you who are here today. You've got to take the responsibility. We'll be there. We'll go to jail if we have to demonstrate our commitment to you, to demonstrate the commitment to our families as we move forward in this very, very difficult task. We're not going to be intimidated by anybody's governments, anybody's processes, anybody's courts, and we're certainly not going to be intimidated by any of the money that HUD-Bay can throw at lawyers to try and intimidate us from doing the ceremonies and the traditional ways of our people in our ancestral lands. Now, with that said, there's so much more that could be said. I could stand here all day talking about these things, the observations I've made in my lands back home amongst the Minnegozi and Anishinaabe. But we've made our point, and I'm so honored that you're here today. All of you who've come in from the Colomb, I stand with you in solidarity. Chimigwech.
Thank you, Grand Chief Nipanak. Now I'm going to call Grand Chief Murray Clear Sky to come to the podium.
Miigwech. He's a so in Indigenous Grand Chief Murray Clear Sky from SCU. I just told you my Indian name. I too have a lot of issues with the two governments, federally and provincially. I think it's time these governments recognize our treaties. By talking about our treaties, I mean our own laws. We got to become a government within our territories. So with that, I too strongly support Chief here, Chief Dumas and his community for what they're trying to accomplish. Rightfully ours, the resources of this country. I say we should take the government to court. That's what we got to do as Anishinaabe people of Canada. Until then, we will be continuing with these press releases. I too stand strong as a unified leader. But those are the issues that we got to put forth. I've been a chief for a long time. I've been through all this. I realize what we're going through. But that's what we got to do. We got to become our own government within Canada. Those are the only issues. Some of the issues, the government is going to recognize us as Anishinaabe people. Otherwise, we're going to continue protesting, doing a lot of stuff, ending up in jails. The government will be building more prisons for us. Until we become our own government, we'll put a stop to it. That's where I stand as a Southern Chief, Grand Chief of the Southern First Nations. And I strongly support the initiatives that are happening up here in the north, to our neighbors to the north. All of us here, that's what we got to do. We got to put the government on notice and sue them. The wrongful they did to us, Anishinaabe people. All these years. With that, I don't know more, Chimigwech, and the rest of you, Sagimaka. Thank you.